Hey everybody, welcome. What's up? I'm so glad that you're here. We're starting a few seconds early. I hit the button just a little too early, off on my timing there, but welcome. You know who I am, I hope. I'm Mr. Lamana. I am here to help you with all of your AP Gov needs. Today, this live session that we're doing is all about Unit 2. So we're going to focus on Unit 2, the branches of government, Congress, presidency, judiciary, and the bureaucracy. This is the major unit of AP Gov. And so we're going to take our time, probably spend the next hour or so together going through this. So hope that you are able to stay. If you have friends who are stressing about AP Gov right now, maybe let them know, hey, hop onto this live right now. It might be something that they find helpful as well. So again, I am so glad that you're here. I'm going to do my best to kind of pay attention to the chat a little bit as well. Try to answer any questions that you might have. I'm just kind of setting that up right now so I can see. Oh, that's the wrong one there. So again, thank you guys. Like I said, we're going to go ahead and look at our Unit 2 stuff. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. I still haven't quite managed to pull up that chat there, but hello to everybody who is here today. Just kind of giving everybody a chance to get in. I know I started just a bit early, so let's go here. My videos. Okay, so we're going to start with Congress. And I think that that makes sense because Congress is, without a doubt, it is the biggest topic of AP Gov. It has the most details. It is probably the thing that people might find the very most stressful because there's so much detail, right? So getting into House versus Senate and the leadership positions and the committees and how a bill becomes law and all of those things. Again, don't stress, you're gonna be good. All right, so we have over 2 days until the AP exam. And just as we're starting off, let me go ahead and also just remind you, we'll be back here together again at 6 p.m. So just a little less than 2 hours now. We're going to do a multiple choice practice on that. So again, that'll be a great opportunity to kind of hop in to really, I'll be looking at the chat a lot more in that one, try to answer questions, go through testing strategy, how I would answer the questions, all of that kind of thing. So with Unit 2, jumping right into Congress, we're going to start off with congressional leadership. And so what we're thinking of with congressional leadership, we're thinking of the major positions, right? So the Speaker of the House is going to be the most powerful person in all of Congress, typically speaking. Now, those of you who pay attention to politics, you might know that that statement isn't quite always true. We've had some more interesting, let's say, times for speakers of the House recently where they haven't been as strong as usual. But typically speaking, the Speaker of the House, they're going to be the most powerful person in Congress. Leadership is much more important in the House than it is in the Senate. So that's another thing to keep in mind. In the Senate, individual members have lots of ways that they can influence policy. So again, we'll discuss that momentarily, but you already know things like filibusters and holds. In the House, if you're not in the leadership, if you aren't committee chair of something, if you aren't a whip or a majority party leader, a lot of times there's not a whole lot of ways that you can really influence things significantly on your own. Like Carl asked in the chat, are they elected by the majority party? Yeah, like Charles says, the answer is yes. It's a little bit more complicated. Technically, everybody in the House gets to vote. It should always be somebody from the majority party because by definition, as long as the majority party votes together, then they can't lose that election. We did see some dramatic speaker elections in the last couple of years with Kevin McCarthy. And so it is conceivable, but yeah, they have so far always been from the majority party. So we would expect to see that continue. All right, so then you have a couple others, the majority leader in the Senate. So this is just to point out, this is a multiple choice question that sometimes they like to throw in. This is really to get kids who haven't studied at all. Who's the most powerful person in the Senate? It's the Senate majority leader. It's not the president pro temp. That's the person who is like kind of technically in charge, but it's ceremonial position. They bang a gavel and like they're the old guy in the Senate from the majority party. The vice president is technically known as the president of the Senate. That is their constitutional duty. However, I'll go ahead and ask this, and I know we don't have a lot of people here yet, but what's the only time that job matters? So in other words, when does it matter? In what scenario does it matter that the vice president is president of the Senate? And there's really only one answer to that question. Man, for whatever reason, this video just does not want to pop up on my iPad. That was going to be my easy way to go along with this. I apologize, but that is frustrating. Okay. Anyway, but yeah, like a bunch of you are saying, Lola, Lisa, Charles, Callie, Levi, Ray, it's to break a tie. Sanchez, Charles, Cassie. So appreciate all of you guys. By the way, if you're not a subscriber, make sure that you subscribe if you want to help me out and like this video. I promise we'll get moving and get into some stuff. So let's keep going. All right, so then we have committees. So we have 4 different types of committees that you might see on the AP exam. By far and away, the most important one is going to be standing committees. So standing committees, like it says here, they are permanent. They are long-lasting committees. They do the most of the work in Congress is going to take place in a standing committee. So everybody in both the House and the Senate, because they both use a committee system, basically what happens is that they get assigned to a few different committees. And the idea is that they will hopefully gain some expertise, gain some specialization in that topic area. So maybe you get put on an agriculture committee, or on education, or on foreign affairs, or on budget, or on taxes, ways and means, whatever it is, right? You get put on this committee and you likely stay and work on that committee for years and years, as long as you stay in Congress. And so the idea again is that you're going to kind of really get to know that subject area pretty well, hopefully. And you start to understand the ins and outs of that policy better than you would if you were, not. And so again, just this small group, they are really going to focus on that legislation. They mark up or edit the bills. They revise the bills. They're going to perform congressional oversight. So that's going to take place at the end. And we'll discuss that when we talk about the bureaucracy. But there is a role for them even after the bill has passed. Another type of committee is known as a conference committee. So these are the two that are the most frequently asked about on the AP exam: standing committees and conference committees. Conference committees are made up of both members of the House and the Senate, and they have basically one purpose, which is that if the House version of a bill is different than the Senate version of a bill, they can't send those two different bills to the president, so it can't become a law. So the only way to send the bill to the president is that they have to make a compromised version of that bill, so that the House version and the Senate version are exactly 100% the same. And so when they each pass a different version, it gets sent to the conference committee, and if they are able to, they will make a compromise version of that bill. And so that's their purpose. There are 2 others. I didn't put little banners for them. That's okay. They're not as frequently going to be tested. One is a special or select committee, and those are temporary. They are for investigations. So it might be investigations into like January 6th. It might be investigations into COVID origins or things like that. So they serve a purpose, and then they're disbanded after they essentially file their report. And the other one is a joint committee. Joint committee is any committee that includes both representatives and senators. So a conference committee is a type of joint committee. But yeah, typically they're going to ask you most likely about the conference committee. And then just to name a couple of specific committees, again, I'll ask this and see what we got in the chat. Can anybody name for me? There's a committee that exists only in the House, and it's like this extra step in the legislative process. So that's one of the committees you might want to know by name, a committee that exists in the House, and it's going to talk about, whether there can be debate or amendments added to bills, that sort of thing. I see some answers in the chat. There we go. Rules Committee. That's exactly right. The House Rules Committee. See, you guys are good. You're here because you want a 5, and you guys are going to get a 5 on this exam. I already know. And yeah, so Carl just kind of asked that question about open rule and closed rule. That's going to relate to the standing committees, to the House Rules Committee specifically. They will decide whether a bill is an open or a closed rule. Open rule bill meaning that it can have amendments added, closed rule meaning no amendments allowed. And I think probably Carl's asking wasn't what I just answered. He's probably meaning, well, what if it's a closed rule bill? Can it get changed in the conference committee? And the answer is yes. So even if it was a closed rule bill, that just means that on the House floor, they couldn't add or propose amendments. But now in conference committee, they're going to reconcile and make one version of the bill. Now, to ensure that everybody in the House is okay with that bill, it's now going to get sent back to the House and back to the Senate, where they will have another chance to vote. So it's possible that you liked the original House version of the bill, but then it got changed in such a way that it added some of the Senate's things, and now you're against it. And so it does go back to the House, it does go back to the Senate, and they will vote again. So Carl, let me know, hopefully that kind of answered what you were thinking of there. I hope that it did. I'll ask another one. What is the committee that is in charge of taxes? So all tax and revenue bills have to originate in the House. That's something that we probably know. What's the name of the committee? And it's an oddly named committee. I'll give you that. It's not the tax committee or taxation committee. So there is a committee that is in charge of originating all tax and revenue bills. So I'll ask that one, and we'll do one other one, which is, what's the committee that is a Senate committee that's going to basically look at, it's hard not to give this one away, but if the president is nominating judges, there's a committee that's in charge of essentially doing the background check and investigating them, and then they hold the confirmation hearings and all of that. All right, very nice. I see lots of ways and means there, so that is good. Yeah, so we have the Ways and Means Committee, and then the other one is going to be the Senate Judiciary Committee, which it's tough to get you to guess that one without just kind of giving it away. So, all right, our next one. So here we go. Oh, look at that. I mentioned the House Rules Committee here. So this is just looking at some of the things that are true about the House only. So again, the AP exam loves to do House and Senate differences. The House is more formal. It has more rules because it has more members, right? Again, I'll just throw this one to the chat. How many members are there in the House of Representatives when we have a full House? So how many seats are there? It's a lot more than there are in the Senate, right? The Senate has 100. It's 2 per state. The House is representing districts. It's closer to the people. Their elections are every 2 years, not every 6 years. So you have, a lot more kind of rules and formality to it. I mean, look at you guys. This is amazing. 435 is exactly right. 435 members of the House. And so you have, again, these more rules. There is a time limit, typically 2 to 5 minutes. A lot of times it's not even anything. Discharge petition is, you have a couple of these more specific vocab words, discharge petition and committee of the whole. Don't get bogged down in these too much. Hopefully, you kind of know them. The biggest thing is if you had like a list, you'd want to know that these belong to the House and not to the Senate. Discharge petition is that, let's say that you have a bill, it's about education, and it gets sent to the Standing Committee on Education, and they just take the bill and they're like, nah, we're not going to deal with that, and they put it to the side. That's what happens to most bills, right? Most bills die in committee, but maybe you really want your bill to succeed. And so if you can get a majority of the members of the House to agree with you, you can force that bill out of committee through a discharge petition. So it's a majority vote to force a bill out of committee and to the House floor. This doesn't happen very often. There was a story about this not too long ago, a month or two ago, which is one of the rare times I've seen it recently. But it doesn't happen very often. It's kind of a repudiation of House leadership. And so you don't hear a lot about that. But the AP exam likes it because it's a House Senate difference. Committee of the whole is where the House forms itself into a committee. So it's all 435 members, the whole House. And then they basically bang a gavel and say, all right, we are now a committee of the whole. And so they can kind of rush through the initial process. And this is kind of speeding up the process. So allows them to pass something. It's going to be for like formalities. So this isn't going to be on like controversial bills. But if they want to proclaim like today a day of remembrance, or like if Jimmy Carter passes away and they want to say we're going to declare that all flags be flown at half staff, like that kind of thing, is where you'll see committees of the whole more often. In the Senate, we already kind of touched on this. Individual senators have a lot of power and ability to influence legislation. The biggest is going to be through filibusters, even though that's not the first one there. Filibuster is a long speech which is designed to prevent or delay a bill from being voted on. The idea is that you are typically going to see filibusters done by members of the minority party. And the reason that that's going to be the case is that this is their way to stop a bill that has majority support. If a bill doesn't have majority support, there's no reason to filibuster it because you might as well just let the vote happen and it's going to lose, right? You would filibuster something if it's actually in danger of passing and you want to prevent it. So again, I'll ask this, I'll throw it to the chat. How do you end a filibuster? All right, how do you end the filibuster? There's a couple answers. You can give me the vocab word for what that's called. You can give me a number, or you can give me a fraction. So there's 3 different answers to that I think are all pretty valid. You could also tell me what kind of majority it is. So there's 4 answers. Everybody's saying cloture, so we got that. So now we're looking for the number and for the fraction, and we'll see if we can get that. This is also true, by the way, for holds. So the same way that you end a filibuster through cloture is going to be the exact same way that you end a hold. A hold is technically where a member of the House, or sorry, the Senate is saying, hang on, I need more time to do some research. So before you vote on this bill or discuss it, I'm going to place a hold on it so I can come back better informed. Of course, that's not why it's actually used these days. It's used to prevent that bill from being voted on. It's just kind of an easier, more common way to do that. I see lots of 60, which is correct. And it is a 3/5 majority. So 60 out of 100. So hooray math, it's 3/5. And like Levi says, that is a super majority, and Best Friends for Life agrees. So awesome job. You guys, like I said, we're going to be great on this. I'm not even concerned. Unanimous consent agreements, also kind of a more formality sort of thing. Somewhat. I'm making that a little oversimplified, if I'm being honest. But for the AP exam, it's basically another way to accelerate or speed up the legislative process. So notice that holds and filibusters would slow it down. Unanimous consent agreements, it's basically where they say, all right, we all agree, nobody will debate this, and we'll just do it. So same thing. It's going to be a lot of times things like Jimmy Carter passed away, so let's fly the flags. Nobody's going to really argue against that too much. Riders probably won't be on the AP exam. It's an amendment to a bill that is non-germane. So I don't think I really used the word germane. It was on the previous banner, but I didn't discuss it. Germane just means that something is on topic. So in the House, if you're offering an amendment to a bill, it has to be relevant to the actual bill. In the Senate, your amendment or your speech can be about anything. And so this is how we end up with senators reading Green Eggs and Ham, like literally, because they can talk about anything that they want, and they can add amendments about anything. And so when they add a non-germane amendment, that is a rider. All right, so we're going to talk about money a little bit. So one of Congress's major powers is the power of the purse. We mentioned the House Ways and Means Committee. That's where all tax and revenue bills are going to originate in the House. Fiscal policy, very broadly speaking, it's just talking about anything involving either taxing or government spending. So if the government is spending money, it does not matter what they're spending money on, it's fiscal policy. If they're taxing you, fiscal policy. Those of you in econ, you already know these terms and you are familiar with it on a much deeper level than we need to be for AP Gov. That's really the main of it. I guess the couple things I would add to this is that fiscal policy is political. It is done by Congress and the president. So the president is going to propose a budget. Trump is doing that right now. He's proposing the 2026 federal budget. What the president proposes, Congress doesn't have to look at all. They can ignore it. They can take it. They can take parts of it and ignore parts of it. They can completely reject it. It's up to them because Congress has the power of the purse. So they are ultimately going to make a budget. And again, it's a little bit more complicated. They're going to break it down. They're going to make multiple budgets. It's a whole thing. Don't worry about it. For our class, Congress makes a budget, and then the president would sign it or veto it. So you have it just like a normal, lawmaking process. All right. Then the other thing I wanted to say is that this is in contrast to monetary policy. We'll do monetary policy in Unit 4. So if you are still with me, that's going to be tomorrow evening. We'll do Unit 4. I think it's at 4 p.m. tomorrow. So I think I have 2 tomorrow. No, we're going to do 1 tomorrow, I think at 4 p.m. And we'll talk about Unit 4. So yeah, we'll be back for that. Now, for this section, what AP Gov likes to focus on is kind of mandatory versus discretionary spending. So we have 2 main categories or types of spending. Mandatory spending is what it sounds like. It's spending that is required by law. It is mandatory. Essentially what happens is that Congress passes a law, and that law says that this program must be funded basically henceforth and forevermore. So you can, or Congress can, change mandatory spending, but the only way to do it is to pass new legislation. Sometimes mandatory spending is called automatic spending because it will happen automatically. So this is spending that occurs outside of the regular budget process. So we are thinking here of entitlement programs most commonly and interest on the debt. So Congress does not pass a budget and say, all right, this year we're going to pay the interest on the debt and it's going to be $800 billion. We just accrue interest on the debt and they have to pay it. And so, again, this is going to be done without any new legislation. The other main category is entitlements. That's going to be the biggest section of mandatory spending. And you have some of our big programs there. Again, most likely they'll focus on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Those are our big 3 entitlement programs. We probably don't need to get into the weeds too much on this, but Social Security, there is a law. So back from the mid-1930s, FDR's presidency, and it says, here's who gets Social Security. If you have a disability, if you're above a certain age, or if you are a survivor of somebody that was getting Social Security benefits, like a minor or a spouse disability, or you're at that age requirement, you will qualify for this amount of money. And so again, Congress doesn't have to do anything. One of the big things to know is that spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid is going way up in recent decades. The biggest reason is that we have lots and lots of older people. So we have an aging population. The baby boomers were a huge, or are a huge generation. And as they are hitting retirement age, which they are doing en masse right now, then there's more of them receiving those benefits. And so the program gets really expensive. Medicare and Medicaid costs also have been rising. Healthcare costs have been rising much faster than the rate of inflation ever since the 1960s. So you have like 60 plus years of that sort of thing. And so those things are getting very, very expensive. So we have a lot of money being spent on Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. The biggest area of federal spending as a category is, if I just go back, is going to be mandatory spending. It's over 70% of the federal budget. So over 70% of all federal spending is on mandatory spending. Of that, the single biggest program, if we want to say single program, is going to be Social Security. It's about $1 trillion. So we have like a $7 trillion budget, and 1 trillion of that, over 1 trillion, is Social Security. If we combine Medicare and Medicaid, that's going to be about 1.5 trillion. Medicare is about 900 billion to 1 trillion. So it's just under Social Security. It's rising extremely fast these days. So yeah, there's a lot of money being spent on these things. So just kind of keep that in mind when they ask you the largest area. Most students want to say the biggest area of spending is defense, but that is in fact not true. It is actually Social Security or mandatory spending. Let me just check the chat real briefly. What are the best full official AP practice tests to do for AP Gov? I'm biased. I happen to like the ones in the Ultimate Review Pack and the Ultimate Exam Slayer. The Ultimate Exam Slayer, by the way, has a great, I'll take a brief moment. I don't want this to turn into like a commercial or anything. It's extremely awkward. I am not a salesman. I can't do that, but let me just show this to you. This is what the Ultimate Exam Slayer looks like. It basically looks exactly like what you're going to see on test day with Blue Book, with College Board. It's not affiliated with them, but you have a pretty good testing software. You can, mark a question for review to flag it. You can get rid of answer choices if you'd like. You make your answer choice B, go on to the next, you get feedback, you have good practice questions, AP level stuff. So again, if you were to look at this, the Ultimate Exam Slayer has 2 full-length practice exams just like this, and it has 5 unit exams. So it has 1 for each unit. The Ultimate Exam Slayer has lots and lots of practice questions. They're not like test questions, they're practice questions. So some of them are a little bit lower level, but then there are also 2 full-length practice exams. They're not on that same platform, that software, but they are also really excellent for that as well. All right. And then just looking, somebody said your teacher should have provided. Yeah, Google Pass exams. I'm not going to tell you to do that. Those should not be up on the internet, but every teacher that has access to those exams agrees that they won't get out there. Yeah. And yeah, depending on if your teacher gives you access to AP Classroom, then you might have those as well. Kind of just depends. Some like to do those in class. Some like to do those or leave them to students. All right, entitlement programs, we did that one. So then discretionary spending, this is only about 30% of the budget, and that fraction is shrinking. All right, so we've been moving way more towards mandatory. This is going to limit the power of Congress and the president to control the budget because a lot less of it is actually up for debate. So out of that $7 trillion, they're fighting over about 2 trillion of it, right? The other 5 is kind of just happening automatically. Defense is the largest area of discretionary spending. It's just under $900 billion right now. So it is a very significant amount of the budget, but it is smaller than Social Security. So just be aware of that in case you get a test question like that. Okay. Pork barrel legislation. I saw somebody ask that in the chat. I didn't respond because I knew it was coming up very quickly on one of these slides. Pork barrel legislation is legislation that provides money for some kind of project, tangible benefit back to a member's home district. So it's really, really specific. So let's say that you are in the district in like in Central Florida, and that representative wants money to go to subsidize citrus farmers. That would be an example of pork barrel legislation. So it's not like a project that they think is good for the country. It's like, what benefit can I get from my constituents? Maybe it's a bill that like the U.S. government is going to buy certain, products, and they're going to make sure that their products get bought from the factory that's in their district, right? That's what we're thinking of with pork barrel. Log rolling, don't confuse the two, but log rolling is going to be vote trading. So it's, hey, you vote for mine, I vote for yours. It does go hand in hand with log rolling pretty closely. You just have to be careful. So why does a senator or a representative from Idaho vote for my citrus farmer legislation? Because they don't care about my citrus farmers. And the reason is because we engage in log rolling. Log rolling is, hey, I'll vote for your potato legislation. You vote for my citrus farmer legislation, and we trade votes, and they both pass. One of the outcomes of pork barrel and log rolling is it's going to be more expensive to do things because, all right, you want your thing, I want my thing, and the price tag is going to go up. An omnibus bill is going to be like a major, huge budget bill that's going to include lots of different legislation, things that are unrelated. It's going to throw all these things like into one piece of legislation. So again, if you've been paying attention to current events, right now there's debate of whether there should be 1 or 2 budget bills from Congress. Trump is demanding, he says he wants one big, beautiful budget bill. So he's not using the term, but what he wants is an omnibus bill. So hopefully that kind of makes sense there. Kendra asks, how do you stop mandatory spending? It's through new legislation will be the way that you do that. Carl asks, if 30% is discretionary, why do we have a lot of debt? Well, the debt is irrespective of whether it's mandatory or discretionary. The biggest cause of our national debt is going to be the mandatory spending. It's going to be the rise in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are the biggest movers of it. But there's no distinction. The reason we have national debt is because we have budget deficits, right? We're spending more money than we're bringing in. The last few years, since Trump, it's been over $1 trillion deficits, and the last couple of years have been $2 trillion deficits. During the first year of COVID, we had a $4 trillion deficit. So we're just spending more money, and that includes we're spending more on both mandatory and discretionary. So that doesn't really make that distinction. All right. Ellie asks, can you go over deficits and how to stop them? That's really easy. A deficit is just whenever you spend more than you take in tax revenue. How you stop it is remarkably simple to say, insanely difficult and almost impossible to do. You just don't spend money that you don't. So if you only bring in $5 trillion in tax revenue, then guess what? To eliminate a deficit, you don't spend more than $5 trillion. It sounds really simple. It's not. It's going to be extremely difficult. It turns out Americans of both parties, by the way, this is a bipartisan thing, but Americans like getting stuff. We don't like paying for it. So, they're just running stuff up on the credit card. And that's not the time for this video. I love talking about that. It's one of my favorite topics in Gov and Econ is talking about can that last forever? The answer is no, but that's not for us on this. Rishi suggests more taxes. That could work. There's a limit to that so you could say, all right, we need to have $7 trillion in tax revenue. But you get into some economic arguments about how successful that could be. Just because you raise taxes. So right now, the tariff rate is over 5 times higher today what it was 3 months ago. Has tariff revenue increased by 5 times? No. Has it doubled? No. So just because you raise taxes by a certain percent, it does not mean that the revenue will increase by that percent. Because it turns out people do a funny thing. Again, if anybody is here is an AP Econ, you can shout it out in the chat, but people respond to incentives. And because people respond to incentives, we change our behavior because guess what? People don't like paying taxes. Anyway, that's way too much. I shouldn't still be talking about this. I apologize. Shout out to ERHS. I don't know what the ER stands for, but some high school. Yeah. Yes, I do micro. I do micro and I do macro. Some of those videos are pretty old, but I do. And I love those classes. The next 3 terms I'm going to go through these fast. This is talking about what's the proper way for a member of Congress to represent their members. Should they do what they think is best? Should they do what their members, their constituents think is best, or something else? So if I am your member of Congress and I'm acting as a trustee, what that means is that I'm going to vote my conscience. I'm going to say, well, I know more about this. I'm thinking about the long-term interest of the country. And yes, I know that my constituents want free stuff because I just said Americans like free stuff without paying for it. But I know that this won't be a good thing. So I'm going to vote against it. Problem with that, maybe I don't get reelected. So a lot of times, especially members of the House, they might act more like delegates. Delegate votes their how their constituents want. So it says, all right, well, I think we shouldn't do this. This is not a good idea, but my constituents really want this, and so we're going to go ahead and do it. So that is the delegate model. And Politico, the most realistic, is sometimes, it depends, right? So if it's an issue everybody's paying attention to, I'll probably be a delegate. If people aren't really paying attention to it, if it's really detailed and wonky, then I'll probably do what I think is best and act as a trustee. All right, next section. We got to go a little faster because we're 30 minutes in and not even done with Congress yet. So I'm going to move along a little bit quicker. We're talking about congressional districts and so how the maps get drawn a certain way. So we have kind of a multi-step process that's happening here. Step one is reapportionment. So you have a census every 10 years. So the next one will be in 2030. The last one was in 2020. And you count the numbers of people in the country. And then you say, all right, based on population, state of Florida, you guys have an additional representative. Texas, you get a couple more representatives. Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, you're going to lose a representative because people are moving out of your state, becoming relatively smaller share of the population. So you just change the number of seats that each state has in the House. Notice you have to add those last couple in the House words. If you don't, the total number doesn't change. It's been 435 for over 100 years now. So that number is unchanged. It's the number per state. Okay. Redistricting is what's done next. So when Florida goes from having 27 members to 28 members, well, their map was drawn in 27 districts. Now you got to redraw the map and do it in 28. And so this is going to be done by state legislatures. I'm surprised I didn't put that on this banner, but it's the most important thing that state legislatures do for our class. Okay, they do lots of important things. Our class focuses primarily on the federal government, as you are probably well aware. This is one of the things they do that directly affects the federal government. They're going to draw those districts. Now, I'll ask you a question. When they draw these districts, do they typically do it in a nice, fair, unbiased, neutral way? No. I know that you know the answer to that. So the way they often do it is going to be through gerrymandering. Just be careful. Don't use the words redistricting and gerrymandering interchangeably because they don't have to gerrymander, right? They could do it neutrally, and sometimes they do. Typically, the reason that they will do it more fair and neutral is because within their state government, one party doesn't control the whole thing. Pretty much in states where one party controls the House, the Senate, and the governor, they're going to do it pretty biased to favor their party. And Democrats do it when they're in charge. Republicans do it in states where they're in charge. It's kind of just the way that it is. So the ones that are the more neutral maps, you can probably guess has divided government, where maybe they have a Democrat as a governor and they have a Republican-controlled Congress, something like that. But for the most part, we see lots of gerrymandering. So you draw the districts in bizarre shapes, and it's going to be typically to benefit a party. So partisan gerrymandering is allowed. Yes, nod your head. Yes, partisan gerrymandering is allowed. In fact, the Supreme Court ruled just a couple years ago that not only is partisan gerrymandering allowed, but you can't even challenge a map if you think that it was gerrymandered based on party. Party is not an immutable characteristic, and so they can be as biased as they want when it comes to drawing it on a partisan level. However, there is a type of gerrymandering they can't do, and let me just go back to that one. I shouldn't be on this one yet. They cannot do racial gerrymandering, whether it's to help or to hurt racial groups based on race. So like Shaw versus Reno, they were trying to increase Black voter representation, and the Supreme Court said, nope, you can't do that. They had already said through legislation that you can't do it to harm racial minorities, but now you can't do it to help either. And the Supreme Court has definitely been going along those lines in recent cases, even more than they did in Shaw versus Reno. There's a current case right now. Again, let me not get into current events, but there's another one about that, the extent to which there's a question. Can you even challenge it because you think it was racial discrimination? And how they look at deciding it's a little complicated. Another limit is that they are not allowed to do malapportionment. Malapportionment means you have a district of very unequal size compared to another. This is going to be something that comes from Baker versus Carr, which had districts of very unequal size. We're talking about population. Whenever we talk about size, we're talking about population in this context. Excuse me, got a little burpee there. And so, yeah, the districts have to be relatively equally populated. All right, last thing here in Congress, and this kind of can kick us off for the president, is the power of impeachment. The House holds the power of impeachment. The Senate holds the trial to actually convict and remove a president or a federal official. It doesn't have to be a president, can be a judge, somebody else like that. And all right, so simple majority to impeach, 2/3 to convict. Just because you get impeached does not mean you get removed from office. If anybody wants to put the name of a president in the chat who has been impeached, we have a couple in our life. Well, a couple in my lifetime, only one in your lifetime. And I just got depressed and feel old. It was early in my lifetime, though. I want to point that out. All right, so Trump, not just once, but twice. But like Lego Batman points out, Bill Clinton was also impeached. So we have, in recent era, one Democrat and one Republican president that were each impeached. Of course, Trump was impeached not just once, but twice. Nixon was actually not impeached. Nixon resigned before he would have been impeached. So Nixon would have been not only impeached, but he would have also been removed. So they were going to convict and remove him. So he saw the writing on the wall, and that's why he resigned. So he actually resigned before it happened. And look at Vicky King, very nice. Actually, I think Vicky might be a teacher, because I saw people. Actually, my wife told me about it after the live on Friday night. She said people kept talking about Vicky, and I think she was a teacher. So maybe that's you. If it is, shout out to Miss King Skinner, aka Vicky. By the way, if you haven't already and you want to hit that like button, go ahead and smash that like button for me. Again, if you want to check out the Ultimate Review Packet, the Ultimate Exam Slayer, have great stuff for you, or just stick around and we'll keep going here this afternoon together. All right, so with presidents, and yes, Andrew Johnson. So nice job to Charles. Andrew Johnson, that's the one that everybody forgets. So again, one vote away from being removed, trumped up charges about his cabinet. And it was, yeah, anyway, I like history also, and I don't get to talk about history too much. So we have some formal powers of the president, so things that are kind of in the Constitution, him exercising very specific powers there. Veto, pocket veto. So when Congress passes a bill, they send it to the president. He has 10 days and he can veto that. He can sign it into legislation, or he can do nothing. If he does nothing, it becomes a law unless it's the last 10 days of Congress session, in which case you have the pocket veto. So those are going to be relatively rare. Congress can override a regular veto with a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate. Congress cannot overturn a pocket veto because their session has ended and he doesn't send that bill back. All right, Mr. McClagan. And thank you to Scholarly Steps teacher for telling them about me. Line item veto has been ruled unconstitutional. That is correct. So you probably don't need to know that for AP Gov. It was ruled as a violation of separation of powers. The president is commander-in-chief. He is the head of the military, the armed forces. They report to him, makes treaties, nominates federal judges. That's going to be with the Senate confirming. Nominates cabinet secretaries, again, Senate confirmation, ambassadors, and delivers the State of the Union address. All right. Okay, next up is executive orders. So I want to spend a moment on executive orders. Presidents use these a lot. Trump and Biden both have relied extensively on executive orders. They have the power of law, like it says there. They don't require congressional action, but few things. One is, why don't presidents just use executive orders for everything? So again, if you want to kind of let me know what you're thinking about that in the chat, why can't Trump just do anything he wants through executive orders? Because right now, a lot of executive orders are being reviewed by courts. A lot of them are getting struck down or getting paused or delayed. Why didn't Obama do immigration reform via executive order? Why didn't he do Obamacare via executive order? Like, why didn't Trump repeal Obamacare by executive order? And the biggest reason is going to be because they can't. Because executive orders, there's kind of two bases for executive orders. One is the Constitution, and second are federal laws. So they are not making policy. The idea is they are not making policy. They are instructing the executive branch how to enforce either the Constitution or existing federal laws. So if you go back to Biden's student loan thing and he tried to forgive student loan debt, He tried to use a law that was passed in 2003. It was post 9/11. It was a war, the Heroes Act. So don't quote me on the year. I think it was 03. I'm pretty sure it was 03. But he's trying to take that law and say, all right, and now the way that we read this law, we think it allows us to forgive student loan debt today. Trump with his tariffs, he's saying the way I'm reading a law from the 1970s and another one from the 1960s is I think it lets me do this. When it comes to the immigration stuff Trump's doing, he's saying, I think that I can invoke this law from 200 years ago, from the actually late 1700s. And I'm going to interpret this law to say I'm allowed to do this thing. All right. So they don't get to just make up new policies. They have to find justification for it in an existing law or in the Constitution. So the most common way that they can successfully do executive orders is use ones that are based on military and just guiding the executive branch. Because the president is commander in chief. So when it comes to foreign policy and executive orders of the military, they can pretty much do whatever they want. Pretty much. All right. So don't take me literally on that, but pretty much they have a lot of freedom. When it comes to trying to actually make policies like perhaps tariff policy and like Biden found out with student loan forgiveness and immigration policy, those are things that really technically should be being done by Congress. And again, that's not a statement of what's right or wrong as far as policy goes. I'm just saying constitutionally, those are things that are supposed to rely on Congress as making the law and the president enforcing. So when presidents start to kind of make the policy through the executive orders, that's when you have a lot of controversy. Now, obviously, half the country thinks it's great when Trump does it. The other half loses their mind. The same half that's losing their mind now when Trump does it was happy when Joe Biden was trying to do the same thing, right? And the half that was against Biden doing it now is for Trump doing it. So that's all politics. That's not what I'm talking about. I did see somebody else put this in the chat as one of the first answers. Lisa said it, and so did a few other people. But yeah, the next president can just undo it, right? So Biden on day one undid a lot of Trump term one things. But then as soon as Trump got back into office, he undid a lot of what Joe Biden did, right? And so it's much less permanent. And so ideally, if you want it to last, you'd want these things to be done through legislation. So right now, Trump has done about all he can do to get rid of the Department of Education. If he wants that to be actually gotten rid of, he's going to need Congress to do that. Okay. All right. Hearing about teacher that would watch basketball. I don't know. Who's he root for? Let's go Heat. God, we sucked this year. All right. Bully pulpit. The president, when a president talks about something, people pay attention. Trump is a great example of the bully pulpit, right? He brings attention to what he wants. He gets people yelling and arguing about what he wants them to be discussing. It's that idea that they have this position where they can really bring attention to whatever it is they want. Presidents can also issue signing statements. So when the president is signing a bill into law, so somebody had mentioned earlier about the line item veto, Bill Clinton, he could cross off parts of the bill he didn't like and then veto just those parts and sign the rest of it. That was ruled unconstitutional during Bill Clinton's term. So Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, and now Trump again, what they have relied more on is going to be signing statement, which is they don't like a specific part of a bill by Congress. And so they essentially instruct the executive branch to ignore it. They provide their interpretation. They say, like Obama, the most famous example I have is Obama. There was a bill that Congress passed that said Obama could detain people suspected of terrorism-related activities. He could detain them indefinitely without a trial, without an attorney. And Obama basically said, I know that this law gives me that power, but I promise not to use it. I'm instructing the Justice Department that we will not detain anybody indefinitely. So the president can issue these signing statements, again, as a way to essentially get his way on legislation so it can get done the way he wants it. But again, that's, just because Obama says he won't do something doesn't mean that Trump or Biden won't do the same thing. So that's not going to necessarily please everybody, obviously. And yeah, Paris climate was a good example of that. Like, that's an executive agreement, but it's the same exact principle, right? Which actually, look at that. Executive agreement is right on the screen right now. So actually don't pay attention to those words. That doesn't really match. But executive agreements are just like treaties. But instead of a treaty which needs to be ratified by the Senate, an executive agreement a president can do unilaterally. So like joining the Paris Climate Accord or getting out of the Paris Climate Accord or joining it again or getting out of it again, which what I just described is the Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump presidencies, where we've been going back and forth between being in or being out. So these are not permanent. Tamara asks if signing statements aren't permanent. It's not really a permanent or an unpermanent thing because it's just an instruction. It's basically saying, here's how we interpret it. The next president's under no obligation to interpret it the same way. So from that standpoint, yeah, I think you could say it that way, that they aren't permanent. All right. Congressional oversight. So now we're getting into, that's a weird place for this actually. So I'm going to drop this down a few spots and let me just kind of come back up here. State of the Union address. The president is promoting his agenda, basically saying how great everything that he is doing is and how much the other party is messing everything up. Televised speech, again, it's all about, kind of getting people behind the president and getting on his side. Presidents use modern technology. So again, these are very common sense types of questions. And again, Trump is a good example for this, right? He is a social media president. Used to be Twitter that he was always a part of. Now it's more his Truth Social, which then gets tweeted out anyway. But they can communicate directly with the public. He can say his ideas. He can say we need to fire the Federal Reserve chairman or whatever he wants on social media. He doesn't necessarily need to go through ABC News like they would have done in the past, right? All right. Foreign policy. So we have the AP exam likes to ask about this, which is the constitutional tension when it comes to foreign policy. And you have that the president is the commander in chief. So he is the head of the armed forces, whereas only Congress has the power to actually declare war. And so this is a great example of separation of powers, right? The idea being that Congress will decide when we fight a war. The president will be the one who leads the actual fighting of it. So you're going to separate those jobs. However, some of you might know this. So I'll go ahead and ask this in the chat. When is the last time that Congress declared war? All right. When is the last time Congress declared war? You can give me a year. You can give me the country it was against. You can give me the name of the war, whatever it is that you want to say. So I'll give you just a few seconds. The point being, though, it's been a long time. And yet the U.S. has fought in a bunch of wars since then without Congress actually declaring them. And a good amount of you are on the right one. It was World War II, Vietnam War, not a declared war, Korean War, not a declared war, First Gulf War, not declared, War on Terror, not declared, War against Iraq, again, Second Gulf War, not declared. All these other military actions going into Pakistan to get bin Laden, like none of these were declared. So we've had a lot of foreign, we will call them adventures. And the president has been able to do that pretty unilaterally, again, because of his commander-in-chief powers. Now, why does the president have such an advantage when it comes to foreign policy? The biggest reason is that he is commander-in-chief, but there are some other answers as well. So he nominates ambassadors, makes treaties, executive agreements, executive orders that tell the defense and military what to do. And all the various defense and intelligence services report directly to the president because they are part of the executive branch. So has basically all the advantages here. So one of the big themes of AP Gov is that presidents are relatively weak when it comes to domestic policy. They are very reliant on Congress. So again, think about Biden trying to do his student loan debt forgiveness. He tried for 4 years, wasn't able to really do it. Why? Because he needed Congress. Obama wanted to do immigration reform, couldn't do it. Why? Had to be Congress. On the other hand, when it comes to foreign policy, presidents have a lot of ability to do exactly what they want. So most presidents become foreign policy presidents at some point in their term. Congressional foreign policy. I apologize. I keep having that congressional oversight ones. Like I want to keep getting to it. Power of the purse. This is actually Congress's biggest power. So their number one constitutional power over foreign policy is that they have the power to declare war. In reality, it's that they could cut funding. So while a president has control of the military and armed forces, if Congress doesn't appropriate funds to fight a war, it's going to be very difficult for the president to actually successfully fight a war, right? So that's going to be a huge one. And then you have some other ones that are lesser important. Power of the purse is a formal power, but usually we just do formal and informal for president. We don't really use that phrasing for Congress. All right, moving on to the bureaucracy. So the rest of the executive branch. So first thing is that they are part of the executive branch. These are, mostly speaking, non-political, the day-to-day workers. They're the ones who actually enforce laws and policies. So we're thinking about, the career government employees, not politically appointed. If you don't have them, if you don't have people working for the FBI, if you don't have people working for the EPA or for all these different agencies, right? If you don't have men and women in the armed forces, if there isn't an army with people, then the commander-in-chief power doesn't mean anything, right? If the DEA says you can't do something, but there's nobody to enforce it, it doesn't mean anything. So these are the people who are actually implementing and enforcing the laws. You can see a few of their powers. They can issue fines. They can enforce their regulations. And they also at times testify in front of Congress. Again, we can discuss that one momentarily. All right, merit system. So back in the day, again, you guys might know this from APUSH and might think about Andrew Jackson. There was a certain type of system. That's my hint to you if you want to put that in, or maybe think of Boss Tweed or something like that. So what kind of system was the old way of hiring government employees? And this is where, that was where you would just hire your friends, the people who voted for you. It was very corrupt. And you needed people who were totally unqualified for jobs. That has been replaced by the merit system. It was from the Pendleton Act of 1883. And like you see there, it promotes professionalism, specialization, yeah, that kind of thing. Okay, and yes, there's the spoil system, aka the patronage system. So those are both right. We have 4 types of executive agencies or departments. The biggest and broadest are cabinet departments. They have the broadest area of responsibility. So we're thinking about the State Department, the Defense Department, the Justice Department, huge areas of policy, right? The heads of them are nominated by the president. They are confirmed by the Senate, but the president can fire cabinet heads. Independent regulatory commissions are very similar to cabinet positions, but they are smaller in scope. So they're going to be on a more narrow area of policy. So we're thinking about making rules about a specific industry. So things like the Federal Reserve or the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Federal Election Commission or the Federal Communication Commission. What they are going to do is they're going to regulate and make rules about a certain industry. President nominates, Senate confirms. The big difference here is the president cannot fire or remove them. It needs to be for cause. Like they have to commit a crime. They cannot be removed because the president doesn't like their policy. So Trump was really agitating about wanting to fire Jerome Powell. He's the chairman of the Federal Reserve, not because Powell did anything wrong. He just didn't like the policies that he was doing. Trump did about 2 weeks ago, he backed off and said, I'm not going to fire him. We're just going to replace him when his term is up. And so the leaders of these agencies, they will serve for fixed terms of office that usually are opposite of presidential terms. So like Powell is there until 2026, and the next person will serve a 4-year term. All right. Ironically, Powell was nominated by Trump originally, and then Biden kept him, and now Trump doesn't like him anymore. The next one are executive agencies. They perform some kind of public service. So the biggest examples are going to be NASA and the EPA. EPA is like, let's protect the environment, air and water, and NASA, space exploration, et cetera, things like that. Okay. Government corporations. These are examples going to be like Amtrak and the Tennessee Valley Authority. They're doing a job that normally would be done by a private company. However, private companies don't do that specific thing because they can't stay in business because it's not profitable. So like train service up and down the East Coast, Amtrak's going to do that. You guys can let me know in the chat. I have no idea. Does Amtrak go elsewhere in the country? I suppose it probably would. I've only ever heard of it being East Coast, but it probably is elsewhere, right? But the idea is it's so expensive, right? To get all that land, railroad track, it's expensive. And then the train tickets would be so expensive that nobody would stay in business doing that. And so the government says, all right, well, we think that we should have train service. And so we're going to take over and we'll have a company that will lose money perpetually and subsidize it, but we're going to do that job. All right. Pink asks if you're scared for the exam. No, don't be scared for the exam. You guys got this. You're good. You are going to be good. I'm glad they're helping. I appreciate that. Don't be frightened, Lego Batman. With a name like Lego, how could Lego Batman be frightened of an exam? Come on, please, please. Okay, thank you, Green Bike Lane. They are popular on the West Coast, the Cascades. All right, good to know. Yeah, all right. I mean, once I thought about it, it has to be the whole U.S. It wouldn't just be the East Coast, but yeah. All right, so then within these agencies, one of the key things is going to be these next two slides that the AP exam loves to ask about the bureaucracy. So my advice is bureaucracy is one of those things that you can get really bogged down in the details. It can become confusing and intimidating. Stick to the simple stuff and don't worry about it. Why do these agencies have power? They have power for two reasons. One is that they are given broad discretion. So you have this term here, and the term is either administrative discretion or it can be called discretionary authority. All right. Essentially, it means that they get to choose how to implement the law. They get to choose the specific details. So again, this is an oversimplification, but this is pretty accurate. Essentially, what we're looking for is Congress wants the air to be cleaner. They want the water to be cleaner, right? So they passed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act of 1970, right? Are members of Congress experts? Do they know what's the way we should go about having cleaner environment, cleaner air, cleaner water? The answer is no. And so what they do is they empower an agency, in this case, the EPA, who is made up of, again, remember the merit system, experts, scientists who understand this sort of thing. This is their job, their career. They're not elected people. And they say, all right, we're going to give the power to you guys. You choose what's the best way for us to achieve our goal of cleaner air and cleaner water. And along with that, they now give the agency rulemaking authority. And they say, all right, you guys go ahead and make regulations. These have the force of law. Everybody's going to have to listen to what the EPA says. If the EPA says that you're not allowed to emit a certain type of pollutant, then you can't do it. If they say your smokestacks have to be, redesigned in such and such way, if they say that you can't dump a certain chemical into the water, then you can't do it. Now, why does that get controversial? Because what I just said sounds like kind of basic common sense, right? It's controversial for this reason. You are now giving rulemaking with the power of law, power to people who are not elected. They are not responsible to the public. So they can make laws that the public thinks aren't good, that the public is actively against, right? And there's very little recourse for the public to do something about that. So you have people so essentially you have two sides of the same coin, and you do need to understand both of these, all right, for the AP exam. One is, why does Congress give away their power to agencies? And it's because they lack the time, the ability, and the expertise to be involved in the minute details. And again, if you only say just that part, that makes a lot of sense. Why is it controversial? Because now unelected bureaucrats are making policy that has the power of law. Not only that, but they make the rules. They are also the ones who now enforce the rules. And perhaps most controversial of all, they also are the ones who interpret and punish violators. In other words, the EPA says, this is the rule about getting rid of a certain chemical. Then the EPA sends people to see, is your factory violating that rule? So they made the rule, they're enforcing the rule. And now if they find you in violation, they punish you. And when you appeal, you don't appeal to a court, you appeal to the EPA. They have their own, it's called administrative adjudication. They have their own administrative court that now they decide whether you're guilty or not guilty. And so this, hopefully you can see why that would be controversial, right? This would, to some people, be a violation of separation of powers. They're making the rule, they're enforcing it, and they're punishing people. So again, you have both parts of this where it makes sense. You want the expertise. You don't want them to be worrying about politics, right? That's what Jerome Powell, Federal Reserve Chairman, he's not worried about. Trump's worried about today, politics. Powell is worried about years down the road. You don't want them to be making political decisions. But at the same time, if they're not worried about politics, then it means they can do things that are wildly unpopular and that people don't want. And so this is the natural tension that's going to always be felt within the bureaucracy. All right. So I hope that that makes sense. Some people will say they have too much power. Some people will say, no, we should trust them more because they're experts. But that's the basic gist of it. So I hope that that made sense. All right. There we go. Wonky as heck gerrymandering. Not exactly. I don't actually agree with that statement, but congressional oversight. So now we're finally to this. I have two cards about this one. Congressional oversight refers to congressional hearings and investigation into an agency's activities. So let's just go and get a little bit more detail on that. Essentially, when Congress passes a law, so let's just stick with the Clean Air Act, right? They say we want clean air. They put the EPA in charge of it. They let them make rules and regulations. Now, I said that they're mostly not responsible to the people. They are responsible to Congress, though. And Congress is responsible to the people, right? So if we get really upset and we're like, the EPA is going crazy, what are they doing all this for? Now, what Congress can do, the standing committee, they will call the head of the EPA in, the leadership of it, and they're going to say, hey, tell us what you're doing. Tell us about those rules you're making, about your regulations. How's your budget going? Are you spending your money? Is it being done efficiently? Why do you have, why are you asking us for more money this year than last year? And Congress has the power to do lots of things. They can reduce their budget. They can use their power of the purse. They can say, you know what, you're not in charge of this anymore. We think you're doing a bad job. So again, Trump trying to get rid of certain agencies, even a Department of Education, a cabinet level department. Congress has the power to do that. Presidents don't, but Congress absolutely can do those things. They can also pass legislation. So if the EPA or any agency passes rules that Congress doesn't like, they can supersede those with a piece of legislation. They can also, like I said, they can get rid of that as well. Well, yeah. So I'm just to be clear about the gerrymandering. Baker versus Carr is not gerrymandering. They didn't draw those districts in weird shapes. The point was that they had not redistricted. So they redistricted in 1900, and then we're in 1960, and the population had shifted dramatically in the state of Tennessee. So it wasn't actively drawn in such a way to make them be different sizes. It's that people moved, and areas that had been more sparsely populated now had a lot of people because 60 years went by and there were way more people. So hopefully that makes sense. But that's actually what the background of Baker versus Carr. It is a wonky case, so I agree with that, but it's not about gerrymandering. Scholarly steps, I'm not sure how long is in our review. We have just a little bit left. We have judiciary. I like for them to be about an hour. We're at 1 hour right now. So I will pause and say thank you guys for being here this whole hour. I hope that this is helping. We're back again at 6 p.m. So I am going to, we just have a few cards left for judiciary, probably about 7 cards to go. So we'll kind of finish up. If you haven't already and you want to smash that like button, you can do that again. And maybe in that hour between, so when we leave here before the 6 o'clock review, if you want to check out the Ultimate Review Packet, Ultimate Exam Slayer, there are free previews. There's also good follow. There's a lot of stuff in there that's free that you can get even if you don't, want to sign up for the paid version. But if you're looking for great AP level practice study guides, I have an essential question section in the Ultimate Review Packet that's amazing. It basically, I promise, is going to be like what the FRQs are going to be like, getting you thinking about those big picture ideas for FRQs. But yeah, I think that would be great. Lego Batman wants opinions. Maybe in the next video. The next video is a quicker one, so I think we could do that. All right. By the way, I'm on TikTok now, so follow me on TikTok. It's just at Carrie Lamanna, so spelled exactly like you see it on the screen, one word all together, but at Carrie Lamanna. I've been doing a lot of AP Gov stuff. I am just a little baby account on there. I'm less than 500 followers on there, but help me get that TikTok going. And if you could share that stuff, that would help me out as well, because I'm trying, guys. I'm trying. Do a lot on here for free, but, trying to pay the bills. All right. How the president can check the bureaucracy, can appoint and remove agency heads if they're not independent. Okay. So again, cabinet secretaries can be fired. Executive agency heads can be fired. It's the ones the independent regulatory cannot be. So again, just be really careful on that, whether they can or cannot be fired. Executive orders, ideological goals. So I don't know if Trump did it again this time, but I know back in 2017 in his first term, one of his first instructions to the EPA was they could not use the term climate change anymore. And so if you went on the EPA's website, any papers that were published by scientists at the EPA, they could not discuss climate change for 4 years. Then Biden gets back in and he says, yes, you can. Trump probably did the same thing. I'm just not aware. I haven't heard that. I've heard so many other things, but that's not one that I've heard. But that is something presidents can do. All right. Judicial branch. They have, this is just their check, which is the same as the check for everything, which is they have the power of judicial review, right? So courts are able to rule on the constitutionality of things. They can rule on constitutionality of a few things: federal laws, executive orders, executive actions, bureaucratic rules and regulations, and state laws. So these are all things that they can determine are constitutional or unconstitutional. How did they get this power? Well, it's already on the screen. I would have asked it in the chat. You guys would have definitely known it anyway. But Marbury versus Madison, it is your OG Supreme Court case. It is one of the most important, it is the most important Supreme Court case in U.S. history. It is an important one for AP Gov. Probably not for the FRQ, probably for multiple choice. It's a really complicated case for the FRQ, so I would be surprised if they do it. But yeah, most likely multiple choice question, you'll probably see Marbury versus Madison. The court gave itself the power of judicial review. So kind of an astounding thing there. Now, how do federal judges get their job? They get their job when the president nominates them, and then they are subject to Senate confirmation. They are pretty much always going to be people from the same party as the president. Filibusters are not a thing anymore when it comes to nominating federal judges. So this is how, because they're not allowed to be filibustered, it's how Trump was able to put 3 members of the Supreme Court. And it's why the Supreme Court is pretty conservative today compared to what it was, 7 or 8 years ago. It was more balanced. I see a couple other things here. They have life tenure. So they have that job for life. And I don't see anywhere. All right, so let me just go ahead and mention real quick. Federalist 70 and Federalist 78. Federalist 78, Alexander Hamilton talks about a couple things. He says we need an independent judiciary that can't be fired and removed by presidents and Congress. We don't want them to be subservient to those branches, because if the president can fire a federal judge because he doesn't like how they rule, that's not good, because then they're just going to rule however the president wants them to. And then we don't really have checks and balances. So he says we have to have an independent judiciary with life tenure. Now, the life tenure part is way more controversial today. A lot of people say, yeah, we could say that they can't be fired, but give them a fixed term, like 18 years or something like that. That's a great topic, but not for this review video. So life tenure, and they should have the power of judicial review. Hamilton basically says the Supreme Court, they are like guardians of the Constitution. If we want to actually have a limited government, then we need somebody there, the judges, to protect that Constitution, because it says that they are parchment barriers. I love how he writes that, but basically saying the Constitution is just a piece of paper, and a piece of paper doesn't actually stop anybody. You need judges to enforce the law, to protect the Constitution. And so obviously you see where this can get controversial depending on people's opinions. Right now, either the court is being a guardian of the Constitution and we should be thanking them, or people are very upset at these unelected judges, blocking things that Trump's trying to do. You have the unwritten rule of 4. The rule of 4 is that if 4 justices want to hear a case, then the court will hear the case. So what we're talking about here is their appellate jurisdiction. That's the appeals. So the court chooses its own cases from its appellate jurisdiction. There are some cases in which they have original jurisdiction, and those get automatically assigned. But by and large, something like 99% of their cases are from their appellate jurisdiction, and they choose whether to hear those cases or not. So they have, a lot of power with that regard. When the court wants to hear a case, they issue what's known as a writ of certiorari, and that is signaling to the public, hey, we're going to hear this case. It also is them calling for the lower court documents, and that they are going to go ahead and use that or take that case. All right, the chat, not sure what's happening. We're off in random land over here. So I'm going to ignore the chat now because it didn't look like it was anything. All right, last few things we got. Precedents and stare decisis. Again, AP exam loves to test about this. Precedent is a past ruling that affects future rulings. Stare decisis is a Latin term. It means let the decision stand. What that means in practical terms is to follow precedent. So the court does not need to rule on the same issue over and over and over and over again. They rule on it, and then the Supreme Court, as well as importantly the lower courts, say, all right, well, this is what the court said back in 1952 or in 1803 or in 2017. And we're going to keep ruling that same way. Now, the court can, like it says, change and establish new precedents. So again, a very classic version of this. Now it's a classic version. So you have 1973 Roe versus Wade. It says that abortion is a constitutional right. States cannot ban abortion. Fast forward to 2022 and Jackson versus Dobbs, actually Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health. The Supreme Court says we're going to get rid of that precedent, and now states can ban abortion because there's not a right to that anymore. So that's an example of them getting rid of an old precedent, starting a new one. And this is going to occur most often after the composition of the court has changed. So the court was mildly conservative going into 2017, and then since then it's become strongly conservative. It became conservative from 17 to 21, and then by 21 it becomes very conservative. And that's when the court changes its ruling on that issue. Then you have the debate over what's the right way for the court to use its power. Should the judges be more or less powerful? Restraint is that they should be less powerful. Again, so these are opinions. There's not a right or wrong answer. Restraint is let Congress, let the president, let the states, whoever's democratically elected, let them make policy as much as possible. Only rule things unconstitutional if it's like blatantly unconstitutional. So right now, Trump supporters are arguing hard for judicial restraint. They weren't such big fans of restraint when Biden was president, right? They wanted the court to strike down student loan forgiveness and other of Biden's programs. So a lot of times this is very dependent on whether you like the president or not, whether you like Congress or not. They wanted the court to strike down Obamacare, right? Like same thing with liberals. They did not want the court to strike down Biden's stuff, but now they want the court to strike down everything. So it's both sides do it. It's just politics. So try not to get too distracted on these terms. Don't mean Democrat and Republican. They don't mean liberal or conservative. They kind of mean whether you like the policy or not, low key. Judicial activism is, so this would be the more of the left right now, is like, hey, if what Trump is doing is wrong, strike it down. It doesn't matter that they're unelected. We don't care about that. It doesn't matter that Trump was elected. Like, it doesn't matter. If they're doing something that's wrong, strike it down. If you can make the country better, use your power to make the country better. That's going to be more judicial activism. All right. Of course, I can name all 9 justices. Can you name all 9 justices? It's not even a problem. Get out of here. Due process, selective incorporation, that'll be Unit 3. Just ask that question again. All right. So you got Roberts, Clarence Thomas. You got who else? Alito. Little Brown, Jackson, Kagan, Sotomayor, Coney Barrett, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. There we go. All right. Not a problem. It was actually a little slower than I would have thought that was going to be. But that is pretty much it. How can you actually, here's the last one. This is checks on the court. Remember that the AP exam is going to love to focus on interactions. That's a huge theme, obviously. Congress has a bunch of checks on the judicial branch. Their best one is the one I have listed second, proposing constitutional amendments. That one is pretty successful. Like, it's very rare and it's very difficult, but for an exam question, it's a pretty good one. They can pass new legislation. My advice is be careful if you're putting that as an answer. The legislation can't contradict what the court said. It's more that they find a loophole or a way around the ruling. So classic example of this is U.S. versus Lopez says Congress could not pass the Gun-Free School Zones Act because it didn't affect interstate commerce. So what they did was they repassed the Gun-Free School Zones Act, and they just added the words, and they said essentially that guns that were part of interstate commerce are banned at school. So it's more narrow than the law was originally, but if you look it up, there is still a Gun-Free School Zones Act. It's just a little bit narrowed down. So that court ruling doesn't matter so much, right? They kind of got around it. A big one that's come up in recent years is that they can alter the court's jurisdiction or the number of justices. So there were a lot of people on the left who, after the court became majority conservative, 6-3 conservative, a lot of Democrats a few years ago were like, let's add 4 more justices to the court. And then it'll be 8-7 in favor, or sorry, 7-6. Sorry, bad math. Add 4 more, it'd be 7-6 in favor of the Democrats. They did not do that ultimately, obviously, but they do have that power. That is something Congress can do. You might remember from APUSH, the court packing scheme from FDR. It turns out Americans don't really like that idea very much because it's a pretty naked power grab. Be careful about the last ones as well. Presidents and states can evade or ignore rulings. So the president can kind of slow play enforcement. States can ignore. So Brown versus Board, unfortunately, is the classic example for this one. Brown versus Board says no more segregation of public schools, but they couldn't enforce their own rulings. And so a lot of school districts just ignored it. It took until Eisenhower actually started using the power of the federal government to enforce that ruling to actually integrate schools, that schools began to slowly become integrated and desegregated. So again, be aware of the weakness of the court here as a policymaker. All right, so that is pretty much what I wanted to do for Unit 2. I'm just going to check the chat again. I want to say thank you to all 165 of you that are here this afternoon. I know it's a little bit of an awkward time. Afternoon, it's a little bit early. It's Saturday, all that, I know. Please keep using my videos. I really hope that they are helping you. Every topic is here, every document, every case. exam strategy, how to write the FRQs. And then if you do want even more, I have everything on the Ultimate Exam Slayer, Ultimate Review Packet. Those things they are amazing. Like legitimately, they will help you if you want to feel super confident walking in on an exam day. They have everything you need. But if that's not for you, don't worry. Everything on the YouTube channel will get you there. A great question. What's your deadlift PR? Unfortunately, it's still 500 pounds. So I have not gotten above 500 pounds yet. I've gotten back to it, but life happened. I hurt my back a little bit a while ago. So yeah, if you don't believe me, in my 1.9 video, it's the federalism video. It's towards the end. I say something and you actually see the video of me, the clip of me deadlifting 500 pounds. I then make a joke about how bad my bench is. My bench isn't actually that terrible, but compared to my 500-pound pull, it's not great. So yeah, if there's any shout outs, now's a great time for that. Kaysen, there's no way I'm talking about the Jimmy Butler trade. Were you trying to make me sad, bring me down? Why would you do that to me, man? It's not a good time for me with that. Ace asks if my unit review videos are enough to cover everything. If you are really good at paying attention and stuff, then yes, they could be enough. Do I go into all the details? No. They should be a review. Like that shouldn't be the way you learn, the only thing you learn. Some of you might be able to pass from just that, but for most people, you probably want more details. Shout out to Mr. Bartlett. Thank you for recommending me to Connor and to everybody else. Mr. Botts, Ms. Hendy, appreciate you, Mrs. Hendy. Let me go slowly on these just to make sure. Guys, we can do it. I agree with Pink. Can definitely do it. Mr. Bots, yeah. You know, really, ideally, what I got to do 1 year is have like here's the training for the AP exam and here's the training for your squat, deadlift, and bench, you know? Thanks, Jocelyn. Low key cool is what I've always gone for. Shout out to Anish. 6 p.m. stream is going to be multiple choice practice and probably a little bit more answering questions and all of that. Shri Sandeep Patel. I'm afraid of that one, but let's see. Do you think the franking rule might be on the exam? I doubt it. That's like an old timey thing. I doubt it. Do you think you can deadlift more than Heimler? Yes, I do. He's better at YouTube than me, but I think I'm probably a better deadlifter. I'm pretty sure about that. I'm confident on that one. But you never know. Well, if you train, you wouldn't stop like a twig. So just, keep training. I think I did shout out James Botts. Kyle Anderson, Lord help me. All right. I think we are good there. Mrs. Wortherly, Mr. James, last couple. Heimler's beard is dope. I can't lie. I wish I could lie and say otherwise. But if you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button. Thank you again for watching. I appreciate it so much. Again, if you want to check out the stuff, check out the stuff. If you don't, that's cool too. You guys have a great 43 minutes. I'm going to go drink some water, maybe eat some snacks or something. I will be back here at 6 p.m. and we will do some multiple choice together. So until then, this has been a LaMoney production. See you guys.